Hello, everybody. This is Deanna Minnick, and welcome to the Detox Summit. Today, our guest is Dr. Amy Myers. Dr. Myers is a practicing physician and renowned leader in functional medicine. She has created multiple interactive ebooks and e-courses to guide readers through her revolutionary approach to health. She has a very large blog, and it serves as a beacon of hope to the many sufferers of chronic disease, and her food-based program, which is called the Myers Way. Her Myers Way program has helped thousands of people around the world discover and treat their own food sensitivities. So what I really want us to delve deep into as we get into this interview with Dr. Myers is thinking about autoimmune disease, thinking about food sensitivities. And we heard some of that from Dr. Tom O'Brien and some of the other experts in functional medicine. So let's hear more about Dr. Myers' approach to autoimmunity and detox. So welcome, Dr. Myers, to the Detox Summit.
Hi, Deanna. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure to have you. You know, we are friends in this whole functional medicine circle, aren't we? We're as part of this large community of experts and really trying to get the word out. And I really applaud you for all of your efforts. And you've got a book coming out in early 2015.
I do. It's called The Autoimmune Solution, and this is perfect timing. And I'm excited to talk about detox because that's actually one of the chapters in my book.
Fabulous. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of detox and autoimmunity, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about you as a person. What stimulated you to follow this path of medicine and then eventually to come into functional medicine?
Well, it's a personal story for sure. I actually was a Peace Corps volunteer in South America in the middle of nowhere and decided there that I wanted to become a doctor. I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to do holistic or alternative medicine after working down there with herbs and natural remedies, or did I want to do sort of international health after seeing their poor access to medical care. Came back to the States. I actually have a whole podcast on my journey, so I'm going to keep it a little brief here of all the things that I explored prior to realizing that I really wanted to get an MD, a medical degree, which is what I ultimately chose to do. But knowing that I really had a slant on wanting a natural, holistic approach. And so when I was in medical school, I took all my electives with integrative practitioners. I actually went and spent a month with Dr. Andrew Weil, and I was the president of the Complementary and Alternative Interest Group. And I knew that I really wanted to do something that was, as I mentioned, just very holistic. When I was a second-year medical student, I actually got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease myself. My mother had passed away very unexpectedly prior to medical school, and I started having panic attacks at the end of my first year of medical school. And long story short, went to the doctor and realized that I actually was hyperthyroid. I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. So using my interest in holistic healing, I tried all different types of methods and Chinese medicine, various things, and really didn't find anything that was helping me. I opted for conventional treatments, which, to this day, I wish I hadn't done. I no longer have a thyroid. And I've helped people in my clinic reverse their autoimmune Graves' disease and have spared them from doing what I do, which is really pretty bittersweet. But I absolutely love that. And then when I graduated medical school, I decided to go into emergency medicine because through all my electives, I really was not finding what it was that I wanted to do. And then afterwards, I finished my training in emergency medicine, moved to Austin, Texas, and started working as an emergency physician, and went to an integrative medicine conference and heard actually Mark Hyman speak about functional medicine. And when I heard him speak, I knew that that is what I had been waiting for. It was just this, as you know, this really intuitive approach with a roadmap of really how to help people. It gave tools, it gave lab testing, it was a scientific approach, but it was really viewing the body as a whole rather than these individual parts like I was taught in medical school. And after I heard him speak, I was hooked. I actually was fortunate to spend some time shadowing him. And then I dove in and took all the electives through the Institute of Functional Medicine. And then within about a year, actually, I opened my clinic. And about 6 months later, I quit the ER. And I now have a very thriving practice that will see anybody, but because of my own experience with autoimmunity, tend to attract a lot of people with very chronic illnesses, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and autoimmune disease. And it's really satisfying, as I'm sure you know, working in this field, to be able to really help people heal for the first time in my life after many, many years in medicine and maybe helping save somebody's life, but I really didn't get to help them heal and have a really amazing quality of life. So I do what I do because of my own personal experience.
Wow, what a path.
Yeah.
I really like
you didn't even hear the whole story. I made it short.
Well, it's very impressive, and it really makes me warm up to you and your practice because you've been through it. You've actually had this experience, and you knew you wanted to go into medicine, and being the seeker you are, again, that right moment, hearing Mark Hyman, and then even working with Dr. Weil. So that's fantastic too. What a great hybrid of two different paradigms, but all essentially within the realm of holistic medicine. I'm wondering, Amy, if you can talk with us a little bit more too about the thyroid and toxins. We don't really have kind of a deep dive on the thyroid, so perhaps we start there and then move our way into autoimmune disease a little bit further. Perhaps we talk about the thyroid gland itself. Just give us some basics on thyroid. What would happen to us if our thyroid was not functioning correctly?
So the thyroid is really the master gland. It's what I call like the engine to the car. It's really every organ in your body has a receptor to thyroid hormone, and so it's a vital organ. I mean, if you didn't have a thyroid or if it wasn't acting properly, you could have problems. So for me, mine was overactive, which meant that everything was revved up. I was having panic attacks. I was anxious. I had insomnia. I was losing weight. I had tremors. My metabolism was just very, very high. What is much more common is the underactive thyroid for people, and they're probably more familiar with those symptoms. But hypothyroidism or underactive thyroid is everything slows down. So that's you gained weight, you might be depressed rather than anxious, mentally slow down. So you might have brain fog or difficulty concentrating or thinking. Your bowels can slow down, so you can maybe get constipated, or you're cold rather than warm, hair falling out, hormonal imbalances, infertility. And probably the main issue, or one of the main reasons about the thyroid, people are very underdiagnosed because in conventional medicine, they're typically doing a screening marker of something called a TSH, the thyroid stimulating gland. And if that's normal, they call it a day. But there are really about 6 other parts of the thyroid or values that we can check for people. So when our thyroid is working properly, it makes some T4, which is one of the main hormones, but a tiny bit of that actually converts into T3. And then T3 can do one of two things. It can either go to what I call the gas, which is a free T3, or the brake, which is reverse T3. And it's really that conversion that we care about. That free T3 is the most active form of the thyroid hormone. It goes into all the receptors, and it's really what keeps us warm, keeps our metabolism working properly so we're not gaining weight, gives us energy, keeps our hair from falling out. So it's not, and then if you have a reverse T3 and that's elevated, that usually can be elevated when I see a high reverse T3 and a low free T3, so a high brake and a low gas. That's usually somebody who's really stressed, somebody who maybe is dealing with autoimmunity or heavy metals or, starvation. It's really your body's trying to conserve that energy. And so what frequently is happening for people when they're going to their doctors with these symptoms, they'll do a screening check for the TSH, and that could be totally normal. Now, that's a whole nother issue, and I don't know how much of this discussion you want me to get into, but the reference range, I'll just leave it short, that the reference range, many of us believe, is way too wide of a reference range. So you can be within normal range, but it may not be optimal range. Many of us believe that optimal range is actually between 1 and 2 or lower if you're on some sort of thyroid medicine, particularly a combination medicine that involves T3. So what in my clinic, and probably what most functional medicine practitioners are doing, are actually checking your levels of the free T4, the free T3, also the reverse T3. And then I check antibodies on everybody because of my focus on autoimmunity. I frequently will pick up elevated antibodies even on people who have a normal thyroid function. So their body is already attacking their thyroid, although it hasn't really displayed in their thyroid function quite yet.
Talk with us a little bit more about antibodies. For the average person, what does this mean? So does this mean that our body is attacking its own thyroid?
Yes. So you really shouldn't have antibodies to your tissues in general. An antibody is something that we develop when we see a foreign invader. So when we get a virus or we get a bacteria, our part of our immune system develops an antibody which goes over and tags it for destruction and says this is a foreigner. So if you start seeing antibodies to tissue in your body, our body has tagged that saying, hey, there's a foreigner over here, come get it. So when I see somebody's antibodies elevated, it's telling me their tissue is tagged for destruction. It's tagged for our immune system to go over there. And it is going to do that. Now, at some point, your body can put up with this destruction and the organ can still continue to function normally. But at some point, there may be enough tissue destruction to where the tissue no longer functions, such as with your pancreas, enough destruction has happened to where you get diabetes and need insulin. With the thyroid, enough destruction has happened to where you need to replace the thyroid hormone. And so the definition of an autoimmune disease is actually autoimmunity or antibodies elevated and enough tissue destruction to where, something needs to be intervened at that point. So with the thyroid, for many people, it's just a replacement of the hormone, which I can get into if you want, the various types. But what many people don't recognize, and I write this in my book, somebody obviously with lupus or rheumatoid arthritis is probably having some pretty significant and scary symptoms. Somebody with thyroid disease, or we'll assume it's hypothyroidism because that's the most common, where someone just needs a replacement of the hormone, and they might feel tired and sleepy and gain 10 pounds and they start their thyroid hormone replacement. Suddenly they lose the 10 pounds. They have their energy back. They feel great. They think, no big deal. I'm just on this little pill. I have no side effects. This is awesome. I feel great. Well, once you have one autoimmune disease, you're 3 times more likely to get another one. And the next time you may not be so lucky, and it may be rheumatoid arthritis or MS or lupus. So one of the differences between a conventional doctor and a functional medicine doctor is that the conventional doctor just gives you the thyroid medicine and sends you on your way and says, basically, you're cured or you're fixed. We, of course, want to figure out how did our body even turn on us in the first place to view our thyroid as being a foreigner? What is that? What was that reason? Because if we don't figure that out and turn that off, then we've given you some hormone, but that cascade, that inflammatory cascade is going to continue to destroy your thyroid and you'll need more thyroid medicine over the years. And as I've just told you, you're at much higher risk of getting another autoimmune disease if we haven't fixed those underlying causes.
That's excellent. Thank you for that overview. This is really a great primer on thyroid function and all the things that can happen. So I'm wondering, do you think, in light of this discussion on detoxification and toxicity, how much do you think that toxins can affect the thyroid and even lead to what you're describing, these autoimmune conditions?
Well, I think first you sort of have to define a toxin, and probably most of your listeners out there are thinking of toxins as maybe, some mercury or lead, or maybe they're aware of, PCBs or something and plastics. I don't know all the conversations that you've had. Certainly people may not be thinking about chlorine or fluoride as toxins, but to the thyroid, they can be. We need iodine for the thyroid to function properly. And those are called halides, and they can displace the iodine in the thyroid. And then I would even say something like gluten is a toxin, which, I think you've interviewed Tom O'Brien, so perhaps he discussed that as being a toxin, but foods are toxins as well. And so, or at least I perceive them as a toxin. I would put them in a toxin category, although in my book, they're in a completely separate category. But so each of these things when I think thyroid, what are the 3 main toxics or triggers that I think of for thyroid disease? One is gluten, which, I'm sure people have discussed the concept of leaky gut already.
Yes.
And how the larger particle of gluten can slip through and stimulate your immune system. And how it's doing that is your body's perceiving it as a foreign invader. And the molecule of gluten actually looks very similar to your thyroid gland molecule. And it's a process called molecular mimicry, where the body goes to attack the gluten and then inadvertently attacks the thyroid. So anybody with thyroid, whether it's autoimmune or not, but but particularly if it's autoimmune, absolutely going gluten-free. Then there's a whole host of other foods that can then cross-react and look like gluten. So there's a whole host of foods that I recommend you get off of. But gluten being, if there's one takeaway point, gluten being the absolute first one that I would get somebody off of. The second is looking at iodine status, because we have fluorinated our water, we have brominated our food, and that has displaced iodine, or many believe. Now, testing for that is very difficult. There's some skin testing you can do to test for iodine. There's some urine testing that you can do. There's a lot of, or what I read about, a lot of cons to those, or just different ways of which, or rates at which we all absorb iodine. So they're not necessarily very accurate or form of testing. So I actually usually don't test people. I just assume that they have some iodine deficiency, replace some minimal amounts of iodine, not milligrams like some people do in high dosages, but in the micrograms. And then I worry about trying to, minimize and also get people to eat sea salt and things like that. And then also try to minimize your intake of fluoride and chlorine. And those can be very difficult. Even some of the best water filters out there don't eliminate fluoride from the water, and most cities do have fluoride. So it's actually a huge problem. And then the other one is mercury, and that can happen both through the same process of the molecular mimicry, as well as just destroying the tissue and creating an inflammatory response where the body comes in and perceives, that there being a foreigner in there, as well as dysregulating or altering our actual immune cells, are the theories behind how mercury can interfere with the thyroid and other tissues for autoimmunity.
What a great overview. So gluten, iodine, and mercury, things to think about when it comes to the thyroid. So you mentioned sea salt, to get more sea salt. I'm also curious what your thoughts are on getting iodine from seaweed sources.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, that's great. I mean, I'm loving those little packs of the seaweed that are overly priced, little that have a little bit of olive oil on them and some salt, and then they're baked. I could make them myself for much cheaper, but I don't. So yeah, I eat those probably twice a week to get some iodine. So absolutely very good sources. I mean, you have to, I don't want to get too much into it, but I am the person that thinks, where's the source of the seaweed coming from? I mean, what's going over in Japan and the radiation. And I mean, unfortunately, as I'm sure your listeners have heard in this whole summit just about our food supply, and even trying to eat the healthiest of healthy and spending lots of money on food, we just live in a toxic world. And really, there's kind of frankly not really any safe food. It's just matters of degrees of which foods are safer than others. So yes, you do need to be careful about the source of the seaweed. But yes, that's an excellent source of iodine. Thank you for bringing that up.
Are there other food sources of iodine that we need to be paying attention to? So we have those. I'm just trying to think of practical takeaways that we can start thinking about.
Yeah, some in shrimp as well. I mean, you just got to be careful. Shrimp are bottom feeders, or if you're getting them farm raised. But yes, shrimp can be, some seafoods can be good sources. The kelp is a really great source, or nori. And, if you're on a really good multivitamin, if you're seeing a functional medicine practitioners, most of those nowadays have some amount of, the iodine and then the sea salts. Excellent. Those are the ones that I typically go to, to.
So, Amy, in your practice throughout these years, have you been seeing that autoimmune disease is increasing, or do you think that people have a good handle on it? Or what do you think? What kind of people typically get autoimmune disease?
Well, yes. I mean, the studies show that autoimmunity has increased threefold over the last 50 years, and it's not through better detection. It's that there genuinely are more people. And what we realize, as opposed to cancer, for the most part, when you get cancer, you go to the oncologist, no matter what type of cancer it is. But when you get an autoimmune disease, it's not viewed in medicine as a disease or problem or dysfunction of the immune system. It's perceived as a disease of that part of your body. So if you have rheumatoid arthritis, you go to the rheumatologist. If you have autoimmune Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, you go to an endocrinologist. If you have Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or celiac, you go to the gastroenterologist. So many believe that the numbers out there for autoimmunity are very, very underreported, because it's so fractured. It's not a unified front as to one branch of medicine handling all of the diseases. I can't say that I'm seeing more autoimmunity because it's being diagnosed more. I mean, people know because of my own personal story. They typically tell me they feel comfortable coming to me because I've been through what they've been through. A lot of the articles I write surround autoimmunity. I'm clearly writing a book on that. So many people, I just tend to attract a lot of people with autoimmunity. So I can't really speak in my practice. I think it's more of, who is attracted to me rather than, a numbers game.
What is the profile of somebody with autoimmune disease?
Oh,
Does it vary, or do you tend to
yeah.
see a similar profile?
So, walking down the street, no, it can affect anybody, right? I mean, I don't, it affects more women than men traditionally. There is a genetic component to it, though we believe it's 25%. So that means 75% of it, based on twin studies, is environment and all the things we're talking about: toxins, the things other people have talked about, leaky gut, food sensitivities, and stress. So on the outward, other than women, and tend to be people probably from 30 to 60, tend to be women in their 40s. Typically, we don't really 100% know why, but many believe it's the change in hormones. Could be that a lot of these toxins are stored in fat and can mimic hormones like estrogens in women. But also during those years, at least the 30 to 40 range, women are getting pregnant, and some people do better with pregnancy and autoimmune, but it can be the thing that tips people over the edge for their autoimmune to rear its head. So those would be some, across the board: a woman 30 to 60, a woman, and sometimes after pregnancy. But in general, no, I mean, I can't, walking down the street, it's not like, oh, that person right there is going to get autoimmunity. Could you pick them from far away? No. Do I see similarities of people once we get down in it? And can I see that pretty much everybody that has autoimmunity also has a leaky gut? They have at least a gluten issue, if not a dairy issue, and probably an issue with all grains. Do I see a blood type, maybe blood type O? Do they tend to be women in their 40s? High toxic burden, genetic SNPs such as MTHFR, COMT. Do I see these types of things? Candida, yeast overgrowth, suppressing their immune system, SIBO, small bowel bacterial overgrowth. Yes. I mean, once you're in my office, can I tell you, like, oh, once we've diagnosed you, are you going to have, X, Y, Z?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. These were the triggers, but that's the 75% is the environment. So from that point of view, yes, I see a profile of people. And that's, what my book is going to talk about and walk people through how to help those. It's a program. Basically, how to fix your gut, how to get off the foods, how to detox, how to deal with your stressors, and, what to do if you're one of those people like myself that falls in the boat of, extra genetic SNPs that cause you to not detoxify well at all and need even extra help than the average person with detoxification.
So, Amy, what does that mean right there? So you mentioned hormones, you mentioned that word methylation. We heard a little bit about that. So how do we find out whether or not we've got hormonal imbalance and these methylation issues that you speak of? And then again, how does that tie into autoimmunity and toxicity?
So in terms of hormonal imbalances, I mean, most people can get that testing through conventional lab testing and their regular doctor, of kind of looking at, what are their total hormones looking like. And then also, if you're having irregular periods or infertility, I mean, you have some amount of hormone imbalance. If you're have probably 20 pounds of excess weight, you probably have some amount of hormone imbalance, because again, a lot of these toxins that can mimic estrogens in the body are stored in the fat, as well as estrogen in general can be stored in fat and still secreted and be an active hormone. One of the things that I like to look at with hormones is really looking at somebody's what's called a 2:16 ratio, really to see how they can actually metabolize and get rid of their estrogens. It's not, when we're talking about cancer risk, autoimmune risk, things like that, it's not really how much estrogen we have, but it's how is our body able to metabolize that and detox it out of our system. And so that's a more sophisticated test. I use a urine one through Genova, and that would need to be done through a functional medicine practitioner. And then there's obviously some, dietary and supplement recommendations that you would get to sort of sway those ratios. In terms of some of the other SNPs that I talked about, COMT, MTHFR, through a conventional lab test, you can actually get the MTHFR gene. I check it on everybody that I see. The COMT and some of the other ones like GSTM1 that looks at glutathione and whether you can recycle or make your glutathione, which I'm sure people have heard glutathione at some point, if not many times throughout your summit. Glutathione is the biggest detoxification molecule in our body. And some of us just don't make that well. And if we make it well, we really can't recycle it well. So those two latter SNPs that I'm talking about, COMT and the GSTM1, need to be done through some other sort of lab like Genova, or my understanding is that 23andMe is still around, but they just don't interpret your results or something anymore. But I know that those are part of that as well. But I do check the MTHFR on everybody. I personally have, two SNPs there, meaning I'm homozygous, and I'll kind of give you my analogy to that in a second. I have one SNP at COMT, and I am absent at GSTM1. So I don't make glutathione. I don't get rid of my hormones well. And then heavy metals is really one of the main toxins that gets detoxified through that MTHFR pathway, which is why, since I see so many people with thyroid and autoimmunity, I really look at that. And I can tell you that, let me just say, after having seen probably over 1,000 patients and tested that on them, I have less than 10 that have no mutations at MTHFR. So at least everybody in my clinic has one mutation, if not two. And this is a very sort of generic way to say this, or theoretical, but I think it really hones in and helps people understand how one size doesn't fit all in terms of detoxification, or even your needs for supplementation like B vitamins. So if you have no mutations and you eat a piece of tuna fish that has 10 parts of mercury in it, you eat 10, you get rid of 10. In theory, your body's functioning properly in terms of that, pathway. You, if you have one mutation, you eat 10 parts in that piece of tuna, you keep 5 and you get rid of 5. We believe half the population has at least one mutation, at that SNP.
Yep.
I myself, if I eat a piece of tuna fish, I keep 9 likely pieces or parts of mercury, and I only get rid of 1. So you can see how someone with my genetics and somebody who has no SNPs at that mutation, how our needs would be completely different, both for detox. And then what helps that system run, which I know you had the great Michael Stone give a lecture on this. And if anybody hasn't heard that, go back and listen to it, because it will be amazing, I'm sure. But what you need for that system to run are premethylated B vitamins. So methylcobalamin instead of cyanocobalamin, methyl B12, folinic acid, and B6. So, the idea, here's your USDA recommended dose of B12 for the day. Well, you can see how somebody who has no SNPs versus me, ours are completely different. I mean, I can only use a fraction of what I put into my body. So, I tell people, if I tested my blood level of B12, it'd be sky high and somebody would be trying to get me off of B12. But if I do some functional testing, like we're trained to do in functional medicine, I might still need more B12, because I'm just, my toxic burden or, whatever's going on with me, I may not be able to even utilize the amount that I'm still putting into my body. So that's where, detox, as well as all of medicine, is not a one size fits all. We are all individuals. And I hope that that's a good example of how what I need versus somebody who doesn't have my mutations is not slightly different, but vastly different. Dramatically different. And so people with SNPs, I tend to check them more for heavy metals and things like that, because of the example that I gave you, at how they're not really able to detoxify those. And then, of course, I support all those detox pathways depending on the mutations that they have, and support them, more depending, again, on how many mutations they have.
So it's sounding like food sources of methylating agents may not be enough for certain people, that we might need to take a supplement.
Absolutely. I mean, I eat, green smoothies and kale every day. I do not think that I could. I know I can't, because I've done the testing on myself. I mean, I routinely test myself and see how well I'm methylating. So I cannot get that through food alone for me.
Mm-hmm. And if we don't know whether or not we have genetic variability, would it be a good idea just to take a B vitamin?
Yes, or a really high quality multivitamin that includes those. Now, you do want to make sure that you're getting a high quality B vitamin and you're not getting, the cyanocobalamin versus the methylcobalamin. So typically those are not things that are found, over the counter, even at Whole Foods. They really are things available typically at a compounding pharmacy or through a functional medicine practitioner.
Good. And then what about detoxification in your practice? How do you typically do a nutritional detox? What's your process?
Sure. So I assume, if you're in my clinic, you probably need a detox. We call my program the Myers Way. The reason that we do that is I believe it's a way of life. So this isn't, I don't believe detox is you go do a cleanse for, at New Year's and, a month before bikini season. It's really something that needs to be done every day. And so my program, again, we called it the Myers Way. So it's a way of life for you. And then we hope you incorporate it for the whole family, even the kids at home, that they do this with you and that it becomes a way of life for everybody. So I do a very standard, elimination diet, which I'm sure others have talked about getting out the high inflammatory foods like gluten, dairy, soy, corn, and all the toxic foods like sugar and alcohol and caffeine and, trans fats and, food additives and all that kind of stuff. If you come in with autoimmunity, we take it a step further and we actually get more on like a paleo type diet where we're getting rid of grains and legumes as well, at least till we can get you well and off your medicines. And then you can see if you can tolerate some of those. And then I support your detox pathways. So I'm supporting you with things like glutathione or the precursors to glutathione, NAC, alpha lipoic acid, milk thistle, magnesium. And that's really where I start. And then my nutritionists work with you to gradually add the foods back in and see how you do. And depending on what the testing has come back, how I believe if you can manage to swallow the pills and you can afford to, that everybody should be doing some sort of, alpha lipoic acid, milk thistle, vitamin C, glutathione, some sort of combo, just because we live in a toxic world. I mean, there's, estimated to be over 100,000 chemicals, out approved for usage out in our air. And we just live in a toxic world. And so even if you're somebody who didn't have any of those SNPs, I think it just kind of behooves you to take a few things proactively to help with detox. And then, of course, if you're further down what I call the autoimmune spectrum in my book, then you would probably want to take, more supplements and foods to help with detoxification. Again, you can, in our program or my program really focuses on the things that you probably talked about as well, about, the onions and the garlic and the, sulfur rich foods to help making glutathione and all that kind of stuff. But again, by the time you're in my clinic, that is all helpful, but you're probably going to need something on top of it, at least to get you, over the hump and into the place where we can begin the healing.
That's fantastic. What I'm hearing you say is very consistent with functional medicine too, and that is that everything has to be personalized. Yes, there can be some staple things that everybody can do by taking out all these food triggers, but then really tailoring based on our genetics and where we're at in our life and what other presenting complaints we might have. So this was a perfect example of that.
Yeah. And I mean, one step further, what I really teach people is prevention. I mean, it's great to detox, but, the first step is actually prevention. So for somebody like me, I mean, as I give that example about the tuna fish, I say, with somebody with my mutations, I say, so you don't want to eat tuna fish. And I'm not joking. I mean, the first step is really, as much as you can, preventing it from coming into your body, because there is so much that we can't prevent, right? I mean, we can't live in a bubble. Nobody wants to. We want to be social beings. If you're too worried or hypervigilant about your food, or you're not going out and spending time with family and friends and loved ones, and you're not eating out in restaurants, I mean, that's a whole nother set of stressors and toxins that are going to lead you down a path of ill health. So what I really focus on with patients is, in your home and of course in your office if you can, but many are not, as fortunate as say myself, who work for myself. And so I get to control the environment, but really, the air we breathe, I mean, where do toxins come in? We breathe them in, we drink them in, we eat them in, and then we absorb them in through our skin. And so let's think about those three things. The air we breathe, so HEPA filters in your house and your office if you can. Many people believe that the air inside their home is, like, oh, I use all natural products and, I have an organic mattress and blah, 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 blah. Well, still, many believe because of how tightly sealed our homes are these days that our air inside our house is actually more toxic than the air outside, sometimes 2 to 100 times more toxic. So the air you breathe with the HEPA filter, the water you drink and bathe with, because you absorb every time you get in the bathtub or shower, your skin is your biggest organ. So, putting water filters, if you can do a whole house one, awesome. If you can't, just on your tap and on your shower heads, eating as much, pasture raised, grass fed beef, if you eat, meat and dairy or meat and chicken, and, looking at the environmental working group to looking at the dirty dozen and the clean 13 about which, fruits and vegetables. I mean, if you can get them all organic, local, all the better. And then really, looking if you can at all your body products and of course, the things that you buy for your house to clean and all that kind of stuff. But really the biggest ones are looking at the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking or bathing with, putting on your body, and then the food that you're consuming. I mean, I tell myself if I can do that 100% of the time in my house, then when I go out, even with my genetics, I just try not to stress about it. I just go out and do what I'm going to do and know that hopefully, I'm preventing as much as I can in my own environment.
So you just did a whirlwind there of
Sorry.
giving us, no, that was fantastic. Absolutely great. Because typically towards the end of the interview, I'm asking you, what are your 3 takeaways? And I feel you just took us through a very beautiful list of, as you mentioned, the air, the water, the food, and then you gave us strategies for all of those. Would there be anything else that you'd like to include as an actionable, what people can do now so that they're not detoxing and retoxing? I feel like you've exhausted quite a list, so you don't have to provide anything.
Just to add on, you always want to be peeing, pooping, and sweating as well. So, if you can include saunas in there, that's awesome as well. But no, I mean, I think I probably covered it at some point in this interview. I mean, I would say even, I don't know if you're perceiving gluten as a toxin, but I would say that's the number one thing people can do to, better their lives. Yeah. Okay. A takeaway. And this is what I say in my book, if you really, I totally get it. All of this stuff can be very expensive. It's very unfortunate, to live healthy is more expensive than to not. And, it's a bummer. So if you're eating meat, because of the food chain, it's better if you can only, if your budget is whatever, $20, at the grocery store, spend the extra on the grass-fed organic beef than on, the fruit, because the beef has eaten all the, everything that it's eating, and you're getting all of that. So the higher up on the food chain, to me, is where you want to spend your money more than lower down on the food chain. So that would be my one takeaway.
Perfect. Well, there are so many takeaways. There's so many gems of what you've been saying this past 40 minutes. So, Dr. Myers, how do people reach you? You have an active clinic and you're practicing. How would people find you and locate not just you and your clinic, but also your blog and all of your other information?
Everything is pretty much under Amy Myers MD, and that's AMYMYERS MD. So my website's amymyersmd.com, Facebook, Amy Myers MD, Twitter, Amy Myers. So I tried to make it consistent and easy for everybody. So,
well, thank you for doing that.
So we send out a great newsletter once a week. We don't spam you with anything. It's just a really high quality article, usually a podcast, and, a discount on a supplement or, a program or something that's going on, and then spreading information like your summit and stuff like that. So, that's
fabulous. Well, it's really been an honor spending this time with you. You've imparted so many things, very articulate, very rapid fire, and really absorbable. Just really things can just really sink in, I think, for most people listening to this. And I think it's been such a great tour around the thyroid. We haven't really had that degree of depth before. So I thank you for being part of this and imparting your knowledge. It's been a gift.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope I wasn't speaking too quickly. I'm clearly passionate about what I do, and I get so excited that my brain's moving at 1,000 miles an hour that I want them to know everything.
No, it's okay. It's absolutely fine. I think it all came through beautifully. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.